I was supposed to drink that coffee and collapse in front of a lawyer, but instead I'm here telling you this story because someone everyone ignores decided to spill it. Margaret Collins had learned long ago that danger rarely announces itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives in porcelain cups, with polite smiles and soft voices. That morning the sunlight came through my kitchen window, just the way it always had, warm and golden across the marble counter. Everything looked normal, too normal. Ashley stood by the coffee maker, her back straight, her movements careful, almost rehearsed. She turned when she heard me enter and smiled, that perfect practice smile she used at charity events and family dinners, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "I made your coffee," she said, lifting the cup toward me. I paused, not because of fear, but because in all the years she had been married to my son, she had never once made me coffee, not on holidays, not on birthdays, not even the morning after my husband's funeral. I noticed small things, the way her fingers lingered on the handle a second too long, the way her eyes didn't leave my face as I reached for it, as if she was waiting for something I couldn't yet name. I took the cup. It was warm, the scent rich, familiar. I almost laughed at myself for hesitating. Ashley always believed in appearances and doing just enough to seem kind, just enough to be unquestionable. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. She nodded too quickly, then glanced at the clock. "We shouldn't be late for your meeting," she added lightly, but there was an edge beneath her tone, something tight, something urgent. "The meeting, my lawyer had scheduled it to finalize adjustments to my estate, something Ashley had shown unusual interest in over the past few weeks, asking careful questions about properties, accounts, signatures, things she had no reason to worry about." I lifted the cup slightly, the surface of the coffee still smooth, untouched. And then it happened. Rosa moved fast, faster than I had ever seen her move in all the years she had worked in my home. Her shoulder brushed my arm, the cup slipped, the dark liquid spilling across the floor, and the front of my blouse. Time seemed to pause. Ashley gasped, but it wasn't shock, it was something sharper, frustration, maybe even anger. "Rosa," I snapped, more out of habit than thought. She froze, her eyes meeting mine, not apologetic, not afraid, determined. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Collins," she said, but her voice didn't tremble. Ashley stepped forward, too quickly grabbing napkins, her movements rushed, careless. "It's fine," she said, though her jaw was tight. "We can make another one." But I noticed something then, something small and impossible to ignore. She didn't look at me, she looked at the coffee soaking into the rug, as if something important had just been lost. I dabbed at my blouse, the stain spreading slowly, the scent stronger now, almost bitter. I didn't say anything, I just set the empty cup on the counter and walked past them both. I didn't drink that coffee, and for the first time in weeks, Ashley looked uncertain, as if a plan she had already counted on had just slipped through her fingers. And at that moment, I didn't know why, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity: that spill wasn't an accident, and whatever I had just avoided was never meant for me to walk away from alive. I did not ask Rosa anything that morning, and she did not offer anything either, which told me more than any explanation could have. Silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is protection. I changed my blouse upstairs, the fabric still faintly carrying that bitter scent that did not belong to any coffee I had ever brewed before. I stood in front of the mirror longer than necessary, studying my own reflection, not for vanity, but for clarity. At 68 years old, I had learned to trust the quiet signals, the ones that arrive before the truth has a name. My hands were steady as I buttoned a fresh blouse, but my mind was not calm. It was calculating. Downstairs, I could hear Ashley's voice moving through the kitchen, light and controlled, as if nothing unusual had happened. She laughed once, a short sound that ended too quickly. I did not rush back down. I let her have those few extra minutes without me, because sometimes people reveal themselves when they believe they are no longer being watched. When I returned, she was by the window, her phone in her hand, her posture rigid. She looked up the moment she heard my steps, and that same perfect smile slipped back into place. "You should not let something like that ruin your morning," she said lightly, as if we were discussing spilled water, not something that had shifted the air between us. I nodded once and reached for my purse. The meeting mattered, and I intended to attend it exactly as planned. But now I was no longer walking into it blindly. The drive downtown felt longer than usual. The city moved around me in its usual rhythm, traffic lights changing, pedestrians crossing, coffee shops opening their doors to the morning crowd. Everything continued as if nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The parking garage was half full when I arrived. I parked slowly, noting the time, 9:42 a.m. I was early. I always was inside the building. The air was cool and neutral, the kind that belongs to places where decisions are made quietly behind closed doors. My lawyer's office sat on the 10th floor. I had walked that hallway many times before, But that morning each step felt more deliberate, more observed. When I entered the conference room, Daniel was already there, seated beside Ashley, his expression relaxed, almost distracted. He smiled when he saw me, but it did not reach his eyes in the way it once had years ago, before distance had settled into our relationship like dust. "Good morning, Mom," he said, standing briefly. Ashley did not stand. She only turned her head slightly, watching me the way she had watched that cup of coffee earlier, as if she was waiting again for something I could not yet see. I took my seat across from them, placing my purse neatly beside my chair. The lawyer began speaking, going over documents, clauses, percentages. His voice steady and practiced. I listened carefully, not just to what he said, but to what was not being said. There were adjustments, new inclusions, language that had shifted in subtle ways that placed more control into Daniel's hands, and by extension Ashley's. I did not interrupt. I did not question. I simply nodded at the appropriate moments and allowed the conversation to continue, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let people believe their plan is unfolding exactly as intended. But as I sat there, one thought remained constant and clear: if I had taken even a single sip from that cup, this meeting would have ended very differently. And for the first time, I began to understand that whatever had been meant for me was not an accident, and it was not over. The meeting ended without incident, at least on the surface. Signatures were postponed, adjustments would be reviewed again, and everyone left the room with polite expressions that hid far more than they revealed. Daniel checked his watch almost immediately, mentioning another appointment, while Ashley gathered her things with careful precision. But I noticed the way her fingers tightened around her folder, just slightly, as if something had slipped beyond her control. I stood slowly, smoothing the front of my blouse, and for a brief moment our eyes met, hers searching mine, calculating, measuring what I knew and what I did not. I gave her nothing, not confusion, not suspicion, just the same calm expression I had worn for years, the one that had allowed me to survive losses, disappointments, and quiet betrayals without ever raising my voice. We rode the elevator down together in silence, the soft hum of machinery filling the space where conversation should have been. Daniel stepped out first, answering a call before the doors had fully opened. Ashley lingered a second longer beside me, her perfume faint but sharp. "You handled that well," she said, her tone light, almost approving, as if I had passed some unspoken test. I turned my head slightly to look at her, not fully, just enough to acknowledge the words. "I have always handled things well," I replied, and stepped out into the lobby, leaving her standing there for a fraction of a second longer than she expected. Outside the building, the air felt different, cooler, clearer, as if something had shifted in a way I could not yet fully explain. I did not go straight to my car. Instead, I walked a few steps toward the side entrance where fewer people passed, and that was where I saw her. Rosa stood near the edge of the sidewalk, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, posture straight but tense, as if she had been waiting for me for some time. She did not speak immediately, and neither did I. We simply looked at each other for a moment, long enough for everything unsaid to settle between us. Finally, she took a small step forward, her voice low and steady. "I needed to make sure you were all right, Mrs. Collins." I studied her face carefully. There was no fear there, no hesitation, only a quiet certainty that felt far more solid than anything I had heard all morning. "I am," I said simply, then paused before adding, "You did not spill that coffee by accident, did you?" Her eyes did not waver. "No, ma'am," she answered. "I did not." The words settled heavily but not unexpectedly. I nodded once, allowing the truth to take its place, without reaction, without dramatics. Why? Rosa hesitated for the first time, her fingers tightening slightly. "I saw her put something in it," she said quietly. "Early this morning, when she thought no one was watching. I was in the hallway, and she did not see me." The world did not stop, it did not spin, it simply shifted into a sharper focus, each detail aligning with a clarity that left no room for doubt. "What did you see?" I asked. "Something small," she replied, "like powder, maybe from a capsule. I am not sure. But it was not sugar, and it was not cream." I let out a slow breath, not from fear, but from confirmation. "Thank you," I said. And minute she nodded, once, relief flickering briefly across her face, before she stepped back, as if her part in this was already finished. I watched her walk away, her steps quick but controlled, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself to feel something, not panic, not anger, but something colder, something far more precise. This had not been a mistake, it had been planned. And if it had been planned once, it could be planned again. I turned back toward the building, the glass doors reflecting my image back at me, steady, composed, unchanged to anyone else. But I knew better now. I knew exactly where to start looking, and I knew that whatever Ashley believed she had lost this morning, She had not yet realized that she had also revealed everything I needed to see by the time I reached my car. I already knew what I needed to do: not react, not confront, not yet. People like Ashley did not make mistakes. In the open, they built their plans carefully, layer by layer, believing no one was watching closely enough to understand them. I sat behind the wheel for a moment without starting the engine, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, my mind moving through details, not emotions. I thought about the past few weeks, the small changes, the quiet questions she had asked about my accounts, the way she had started offering to help with paperwork, insisting it was just to make things easier for me. I had seen it then as eagerness, perhaps even concern, but now those moments rearranged themselves into something else, something deliberate. I started the car and drove home, the route familiar, each turn predictable, but my focus sharper than it had been in years. When I pulled into the driveway, the house stood exactly as I had left it, calm, orderly, unchanged from the outside. But I knew better now. Inside, things were no longer what they seemed. I entered through the front door, placing my keys down in the same spot I always did. Consistency mattered, routines mattered. They kept others comfortable. They kept suspicion away. Ashley's voice carried faintly from the living room. She was on the phone, her tone soft, controlled. I did not stop to listen, not yet. Instead, I moved quietly toward the kitchen, where the morning had begun. The counter was clean, the floor spotless, as if nothing had ever happened. But I walked to the cabinet and opened it slowly, reaching for another cup identical to the one she had handed me earlier. I held it for a moment, considering, then set it down beside the coffee maker. Everything looked ordinary, but I knew now that ordinary could be arranged. I turned and stepped back into the hallway. Just as Ashley ended her call, she looked up immediately, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before it disappeared. "You are back already?" she asked. I nodded. "The meeting is postponed," I said, watching her carefully. Her reaction was subtle, but it was there, a brief tightening around her eyes, a pause too small for most people to notice, but I noticed it was something wrong. She asked, stepping closer, her concern measured perfectly. I shook my head. "Nothing that cannot wait," I replied, then added, "I think I will review some things this afternoon alone." The word alone settled between us like a quiet statement. She smiled again, but it did not reach her eyes. "Of course," she said, "take all the time you need." I inclined my head slightly and walked past her without another word, heading toward my study. The door closed softly behind me, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself to act. I moved to my desk, opening the bottom drawer where I kept older documents, records, statements, copies of things that most people forget about. But I never did. I had always believed in keeping a clear record of my life, not out of fear, but out of habit. And now that habit felt less like routine and more like preparation. I pulled out a folder labeled simply Collins Estate and set it on the desk, opening it carefully, reviewing each page line by line. Nothing had changed here, not yet. But that did not mean it had not been attempted elsewhere. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. When the call connected, I spoke calmly. "I need a full review of all recent activity on my accounts," I said. "Every transfer, every request, every authorization." There was a pause on the other end. Then a familiar voice responded, "Of course, Mrs. Collins, we will begin immediately." I ended the call and leaned back in my chair. The house was quiet again, too quiet. But this time the silence did not feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something unfolding, something that had already started without me, but would not continue without my awareness. And as I sat there looking at the papers in front of me, one thought remained steady and clear. Ashley had made her move, but she had also shown her hand, and now it was my turn to decide how the rest of this story would be written. The call came back faster than I expected, not rushed, not alarmed, just precise, the way professionals respond when something does not feel routine. "Mrs. Collins, we have begun reviewing the records," the voice said, calm and measured. "There are a few transactions that may require clarification." I did not move in my chair. I did not react. I simply listened. "What kind of transactions?" I asked, my tone even. There was a brief pause, as if the person on the other end was choosing words carefully. "Authorization requests. Over the past 3 weeks, attempts to access certain accounts that require dual confirmation, your primary approval and a secondary contact." I knew exactly what that meant. Daniel had been listed years ago as a secondary contact for convenience back when trust was not something that needed to be questioned. "Were any of those requests completed?" I asked. "No, ma'am. The system flagged them for additional verification, and they were not finalized." Relief was not what I felt. It was something colder. Confirmation. They had tried, and they had been patient about it, careful not to trigger alarms too quickly. "Thank you," I said. "Continue reviewing everything and send me a full report by the end of the day." "Of course." The line went quiet after I ended the call. I remained still for a moment, allowing the information to settle into place. Ashley had not acted impulsively. This had been building quietly. Behind polite conversations and small gestures of concern, I closed the folder in front of me and stood walking slowly to the window, my reflection faint against the glass. The garden outside looked the same as it always had, trimmed hedges, clean pathways, nothing out of place, and yet everything beneath the surface had shifted. I turned back toward my desk and reached for another file, one I had not opened in years, a thin envelope containing older documents, handwritten notes, small details I had kept out of habit rather than necessity. Inside were records of property titles, early account structures, and something else, something most people would have forgotten, but I had not. A clause added quietly after my husband passed, something simple, something protective. At the time, it had felt unnecessary. Now it felt like foresight. I placed the envelope beside the estate folder and sat down again. My movements, unhurried, deliberate planning, requires patience, and I had more of that than they realized. A soft knock came at the door. I did not look up. "Come in," I said. The door opened slowly. Rosa stepped inside, her presence quiet but steady. She did not approach immediately, as if unsure how much space she should take. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. I nodded. "Once close the door, please." She did as I asked, then stood with her hands folded in front of her, waiting. I studied her for a moment, not as an employer, but as someone who had made a decision that morning that changed everything. "You understood what you were doing when you spilled that coffee?" I said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, her voice calm. "I knew I might lose my job for it." I held her gaze and for the first time allowed a slight shift in my tone. Not softer, just more precise. "You may have saved more than that," I said. She lowered her eyes briefly, then looked back up. "I did not think it was right," she said simply. I nodded. "Once that was enough." "I do not reward recklessness," I said, "but I do recognize loyalty." Her posture straightened slightly, almost imperceptibly. "I will need your help," I continued, "not with guesses, not with assumptions, with facts. I want to know everything you have seen, everything you have heard, no matter how small." She did not hesitate. "Yes, ma'am," she said, and in that moment something settled into place. Not trust, not yet, but alignment. I leaned back slightly, my fingers resting lightly on the edge of the desk. This was no longer about suspicion. It was about structure, about understanding the full shape of what had been set in motion without me. And as I looked at the documents spread out before me, one thing became clear. Ashley had prepared carefully, but she had made one mistake. She believed I was no longer paying attention, and that mistake would cost her everything she thought she had already secured. Rosa did not need time to think. She began speaking the moment I asked, and what she told me was not dramatic, not exaggerated. It was quiet, consistent, and far more dangerous. Because of that, she had noticed small changes, first things most people would ignore. Ashley spending more time in rooms she had no reason to be in, lingering near my study, asking casual questions about schedules, about when I usually checked my mail, when I met with my lawyer, when I reviewed my accounts. Nothing direct, nothing obvious, just enough to map a routine without drawing attention. I listened without interrupting, my fingers resting lightly against the desk as each detail settled into place. She said Ashley had received packages over the past month, not unusual in itself, but these were different. No branding, no return labels, plain boxes delivered at times when Daniel was not home, and more importantly, when I was not expected to notice what was inside. I asked Rosa if she had ever seen the contents. She shook her head. "No, ma'am, but I saw her open one once, just a little." She said there were small containers inside, like bottles, maybe medicine, but not the kind I have seen you use. I nodded slowly. That matched what she had described earlier that morning. Something added to the coffee, something that did not belong. I asked her about Daniel, whether he had been involved in any of this. She hesitated for the first time, her eyes lowering briefly. "I do not think he knows everything," she said carefully, "but he knows something. The way he acts around her, it is like he is waiting for her to lead, and that was enough." Daniel had always been more comfortable following than questioning. It was a trait I had once found harmless, even endearing. Now it felt like a liability. I stood and walked to the bookshelf, running my fingers lightly along the spines, not looking for anything in particular, just allowing the movement to give shape to my thoughts. This was not a single action. It was a pattern, a structure built slowly with patience and confidence. They had tried to access my accounts. They had prepared documents. They had introduced something into my morning routine, all leading toward a single point: control. I turned back to Rosa. "You did the right thing," I said simply. She nodded, but did not smile, as if she understood that what had been avoided was only the beginning, not the end. I returned to my desk and opened my laptop, the screen lighting up the room with a soft glow. I logged into my primary account, reviewing recent activity again, but this time with Context, each request, each timestamp, each small irregularity was no longer random. It formed a timeline, clear and intentional. I reached for my phone again and sent a brief message to my lawyer. We need to reschedule tomorrow morning in person. No one else present. The reply came within minutes confirming the appointment. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. Everything was aligning too neatly to ignore. Ashley believed she had lost her opportunity this morning, but in reality, she had revealed her entire approach, and that gave me something far more valuable than suspicion. It gave me control. I looked toward the door, where Rosa still stood, waiting. You may go, I said. She nodded once and left quietly, closing the door. Behind her, the room fell silent again, but this time it was not empty. It was full of direction. I picked up the thin envelope from earlier, the one containing the clause my husband had insisted on adding years ago, and opened it carefully, reading the words again, not with nostalgia, but with purpose, because now I understood something I had not needed to understand before. Protection is only useful when you are willing to use it, and as I folded the document back into place, I realized that whatever Ashley thought she had planned, she had underestimated one thing entirely. I was not someone who reacted. I was someone who prepared, and now I was ready to let her believe she still had the advantage, just long enough for her to make the mistake that would end everything she had started. The next morning arrived exactly as expected, calm, predictable, and carefully arranged. I woke at 6:30, as I always did. The house still quiet, the air cool before the day began to move around me. Routine matters not because it is comfortable, but because it is reliable. And reliability creates patterns that people like Ashley depend on. I moved through my mornings slowly, deliberately, making no changes to the sequence she had already studied. Coffee, water, toast, the same order, the same pace, the same silence. I did not rush, and I did not hesitate. When I entered the kitchen, she was already there, standing by the counter, her posture relaxed, her expression composed, as if yesterday had left no trace at all. Good morning, she said lightly, her tone warm, controlled. I returned the greeting with the same calm I had always used, nothing added, nothing taken away. She reached for the coffee maker without asking, her movements smooth, practiced. I watched without appearing to watch, the way she measured the grounds, the way she turned slightly so her back faced the doorway for just a moment, the same moment Rosa had described. I said nothing. I simply took my seat at the table, folding my hands loosely in front of me. The cup was placed before me with the same careful attention as the day before, steam rising gently, the scent familiar, but now it carried meaning rather than comfort. I looked at it for a moment, not long enough to draw attention, just long enough to confirm that nothing had changed on her side. She still believed the routine was intact. Drink before the day begins. That was the expectation. That was the plan. I lifted the cup slowly, bringing it closer without committing to the action. Ashley watched me from across the counter, her eyes steady, her expression neutral, but there was something beneath it, a quiet anticipation, the same as before. I lowered the cup without taking a sip and reached instead for my napkin, wiping an imaginary spot from the table. A small pause, a simple delay. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the counter, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Are you not drinking it? She asked, her voice even, but a fraction too quick. I met her gaze briefly. I will in a moment, I said, setting the cup down gently. I prefer it when it cools a little. She nodded once, her smile returning, but I saw it now, the calculation, the adjustment. She was waiting for me to follow through, and I had no intention of doing so. Not today, not ever again. A few minutes passed in quiet conversation about nothing. The weather, a call Daniel needed to make, plans that sounded ordinary but felt rehearsed. I stood, eventually taking my purse from the chair. I have another meeting this morning, I said. I should not be late. She inclined her head. Of course, she replied, watching me carefully as I moved toward the door. I did not touch the coffee again. I left it there untouched, cooling slowly, exactly as I had said I would. Drink it, but did not. Outside the house, the morning air felt sharper, clearer, and as I walked to my car, I allowed myself a single conclusion to settle fully into place. Ashley was still playing her part. She believed she was in control. She believed I would eventually follow the path she had set. And that belief was exactly what I needed, because now the pattern was confirmed not once but twice. And that meant I could stop questioning and start acting, not with confrontation, not with emotion, but with precision, because the next move would not be hers, it would be mine. And when it happened, she would not see it coming at all. I did not go to the meeting immediately, even though I had said I would. Instead, I drove 2 blocks past the office and parked along a quiet street where no one paid attention to who came and went. Timing matters, not just what you do, but when you do it. I checked my watch. 9:18 a.m. early enough to control the pace, late enough to appear consistent. I stepped out of the car and walked into a small cafe across the street, ordering the same black coffee I always did. I did not drink it. I simply held it, letting the warmth settle into my hands as I watched the entrance to the building through the glass. Reflection is a useful thing. It allows you to observe without being observed. At 9:27, Ashley arrived. She stepped out of her car with that same composed expression, her movements smooth, confident. She paused briefly near the entrance, checking her phone, then went inside alone. Daniel was not with her, which confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. This part of the plan was hers, not his. I waited exactly 3 minutes before leaving the cafe and crossing the street. My steps unhurried, my expression neutral. When I entered the building, the receptionist greeted me with the same polite familiarity. As always, I returned it without pause and continued toward the elevator, as if nothing had changed. The conference room was already prepared when I arrived, documents arranged neatly, pens placed in precise alignment. Ashley stood near the window, her back partially turned. When she heard me, she faced me immediately, that same smile ready as if she had been practicing it. "I thought you might be running late," she said lightly. "I rarely run late," I replied, taking my seat across from her. She sat down slowly, watching me with careful attention. The lawyer entered moments later, greeting us both and beginning the review without delay. This time the documents were different, not in structure, but in intent. The language shifted subtly toward immediate authorization, temporary control clauses framed as convenience measures. I listened without interruption, my hands resting calmly on the table. Ashley spoke at the right moments, adding just enough to guide the conversation forward, her voice steady, confident. But there was something else now, a faint urgency beneath the surface, as if she needed this to happen today, not later, not after consideration. But now I allowed the discussion to continue for several minutes before speaking. "I would like to review one additional clause," I said, reaching into my folder and placing a document on the table. The paper lay flat between us, simple, unremarkable at first glance. But I watched Ashley as she read it, her eyes moving quickly, then slowing, her posture shifting just slightly. "This clause has been part of my estate for years," I continued, my tone even. "It requires independent verification of my condition before any immediate transfer of authority can take place." The room grew quieter, not tense, just still. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, reading more carefully. I had not noticed this before. He said. Ashley did not respond immediately, her gaze still fixed on the page. "It ensures that any decision made on my behalf is made with full awareness," I added gently, "not under any temporary influence." Her eyes lifted, then meeting mine, and for the first time there was no smile, no perfect composure, just a flicker, something real, something unguarded. It was brief, but it was enough. I leaned back slightly, folding my hands together. "We can proceed with the review," I said calmly, "but we will follow every condition exactly as written." The lawyer nodded, agreeing. Without hesitation, Ashley said nothing. She simply sat there, her expression returning slowly to its practiced calm. But it was not the same now. Something had shifted, something she had not prepared for. And as the meeting continued, I knew with quiet certainty that the balance had changed. She was no longer guiding the outcome, she was reacting to it. And that was exactly where I needed her to be. The meeting did not end abruptly, it simply shifted the way quiet things do when control changes hands. The lawyer gathered the documents with a slower, more deliberate pace than before, his attention no longer divided, but focused on the details that now mattered. Ashley remained seated, her posture composed, but no longer leading, no longer directing. She had lost that. Without saying a word, I stood first, smoothing the edge of the folder in front of me and offering a small nod. "We will continue this once everything has been reviewed under the correct conditions," I said, my tone calm, final. The lawyer agreed immediately. "Of course, Mrs. Collins, we will ensure every requirement is met without exception." Ashley rose a second later, her movements controlled, but just a fraction delayed, enough for me to see the difference. The certainty she had carried into the room was gone, replaced by something quieter, something uncertain. We walked out together, but not as we had entered. She did not attempt conversation in the hallway. She did not offer polite remarks or soft reassurances. Instead, she walked beside me in silence, her steps measured, her attention inward, as if recalculating something she had already believed was complete. Outside the building, the morning had settled fully into place. People moved around us, unaware of the quiet shift that had just occurred in a room 10 floors above them. Daniel was waiting near the curb, his expression expectant. He looked from me to Ashley as if trying to read what had happened. "How did it go?" he asked. Ashley answered before I could. "It is being reviewed." She said, her voice even, but lacking the smooth confidence she usually carried. "Just a few adjustments." Daniel nodded, accepting the explanation without question, as I had expected. He always preferred clarity over confrontation. I looked at him for a moment, longer than necessary, not with anger, not with disappointment, but with recognition. He had not led this, but he had not stopped it either. That was enough. I placed my hand lightly on his arm. "Not to comfort, but to anchor the moment." "We will speak soon," I said quietly. He nodded again, not fully understanding, but sensing that something had changed. I stepped away from them both and walked toward my car, my pace steady, my posture unchanged behind me. I could feel Ashley watching, not openly, not obviously, but I knew she was the kind of attention that follows not out of care, but out of calculation. I did not turn around. I did not acknowledge it. I simply continued exactly as I always had. When I reached my car, I paused for a brief second, my hand resting on the door handle, allowing the final piece of understanding to settle into place. This had never been about a single act, a single cup of coffee, or a single meeting. It had been about removal, quiet, controlled, and complete. And she had believed she could achieve it without resistance, without consequence. That was her mistake. I opened the door and sat inside, closing it with a soft, decisive sound. The world outside continued unchanged, but inside something had ended and something else had begun. I started the engine and drove away, not quickly, not slowly, just forward, because from this point on there would be no more assumptions, no more waiting, no more quiet observation. The next steps would be mine, structured, deliberate, and final. And whatever Ashley believed she had nearly secured, she would soon understand one simple truth. She had not been removing me from my own life. She had been revealing exactly why she no longer belonged in it.